Well, hello everybody and welcome to the Creative Exchange. We are so excited today, well I am very excited to have the wonderful Kevin Adams, or as I would call him, Kev the Rev. He is an incredible guy. He's going to tell you a little bit more about himself in a minute, but he's mega precious to me and to Di. He has had a huge influence on us in creativity, in our faith journey. He was our pastor growing up. I think his passion for revival was what sowed the seed of passion for revival in Wales in my heart, and I just cannot wait for what we are going to glean from him today. So, Rev, tell us who you are and just a little bit about your kind of life journey up to this point and where you actually are now.
Well, right now I'm in COVID America, and which is fascinating. I've been here for the last 16 and a half years. I came over here to lecture a little on the revival, to push the books and the movie, and ended up falling in love with a church historian. I love church history so much I married a professor of church history. So I live here on the North Shore of Boston, and I'm senior pastor of the East Baptist Church in Lynn. And what else do you want to know? I became a Christian in the 1970s in what I call the silent revival of the 1970s. I became a Christian in 1974. Lots of people became Christians. We didn't call it revival. It's only as we look back that we see that revival really happened there and gave birth to a whole generation of people, now my age obviously, who have been involved in leadership positions all over Wales and sometimes outside Wales. So that's me at the moment. My passions are reading, books, reading, paperbacks, classics, reading, and some books. Yeah, something like that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Kev also is the author of this amazing book that I know has gone all the way around the world. And we're going to hear him unpack a little about this in a minute. But Kev, I just want to start, before we get Han to ask some questions, ask you three things. Mm-hmm. What is your favourite book, your favourite film, and music that has influenced you?
Oh, that's very interesting. I have, when it comes to books, I have a canon of my 200 favorite novels, and those are all put together in my office, not this office here, but in my office in Lynn, my church office. So I took 200 in order of my favorites, and at the moment, my favorite novel at the moment, they change, okay, is Middlemarch by George Eliot. I think that is one of the greatest novels ever written, and that every now and again changes. Sometimes Bleak House gets there and knocks the other one back, and sometimes The Power and the Glory with Steinbeck, which is Steinbeck's incredibly powerful author. So they go back and forth, and every now and again, even Dylan Thomas has been there as well. So they change depending on it, but that at the moment, that's my number one. So if you go into my office, that would be number one, right on the top. And the second thing you asked was what?
What is your favourite film?
Oh, that's easy. It's a very easy one. It's not the best film in the world, but it's my favourite film. I must have seen it 60 to 70 times. And that is Zulu. It came out in 1966. I saw it with my father. I remember going to Llanelli Cinema, seeing it, and outside there was a big Zulu standing there, or someone who looked like a Zulu, whatever. And I've never, ever forgotten that film. I have a copy of it. I watch it regularly. It's about the 24th Regiment of Foot, which were the Welsh regiment who fight off 100 men who fight off 4,000 Zulus, and they sing the great song Men of Harlech as they fight the battle. So that is one of the great movies of all time for me. Incredibly, that's me subjective answer.
Amazing. And what about music, Rev? What music would you say has had a massive influence on you?
Well, the music, I'm not a music guy, believe it or not. I sing. I've got an averagely good voice, but I can't be bothered with it that much. Um, Early on, my music was Welsh traditional music, folk music in 1960s with David Iwan, and I was brought up in Welsh folk. I loved it. You know, I learned the guitar to carlo, you know, protest songs against against Prince Charles becoming Prince of Wales, that sort of thing. Then when I in my early teens, I was into the rock scene at that time. So it was everything from Led Zeppelin to 10 Years After, Pink Floyd. They were really my bands. I loved them very much. And some of the folk scene as well, with Lindisfarne. And these days, do you know, I don't listen to that much music. I've got to be honest with you. It seems um, I I like good music. I like music that moves me. It's got to move me deeply. It's got to touch me from the inside out. So I do like what I do listen to, believe it or not. I listen to Celtic music, which includes Welsh, Irish, and Scottish, because there's plenty of it here on the radio. You get on Saturday if I'm traveling from A to B, I put on Celtic Surgeon, and I do really love Celtic music. It reminds me of home and touches me incredibly deeply. So I love music which is passionate or mystical. I like the word mystical, that touches the very inwardness of your soul. But I'm not big on music, I must admit.
Well, that's absolutely fine, Rev. I mean, with your library, you haven't got time to listen to music, have
I
you?
haven't got time. No, I haven't got time. No.
And just one more question before I give a
Okay.
question to Han. So you were instrumental in my life growing up from, well, I mean, you were my pastor since I was born, really.
Yes.
Till I was 18. And
Yeah.
what you did was, throughout our youth years, you did drama clubs with us. You sowed so many seeds of creativity. And I know that creativity and faith are two of your biggest passions. You wrote so many of the dramas that we went all around Wales with, with the message of the gospel. Why do you love creativity, Kev, in like a sentence or two? And why do you think it works so well in the context of talking about the gospel?
I think a number of so many answers to that, but let me give one answer that I use at the moment with students. I mentor students in the church from the seminary, Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and we get students there, mentor them, and I tell them I generally mentor them in preaching, how to preach, and what I tell them is this: the greatest heresy for preachers is to be boring. If you're going to bore people's pants off with the truth, that's the worst heresy, because you're making something which is incredibly brilliant dead. You're presenting a live thing as a corpse, and people are there watching a corpse and, you know, rotting for the next half hour, if you like. And so there needs to be creativity in all sorts of things. For me at the moment, my main area of creativity is the actual sermon. I believe that the sermon is an art form. Which needs to be seen in that sense. I'm not a writer. My wife's a writer. She's very good. She can do that. I can't. I can write poetry. I can actually write poetry now, which is unbelievable. I never thought. I started writing poetry about 3.5 years ago, and I've written quite a bit. And I love that. But that's more personal. That's me expressing myself personally. And it's and with poetry, for me, I can express something I can't say. I can say it in different language. And I love that. I just love doing that. Preaching is my main area. Then I don't do drama anymore. But I'm inside. I love those times, the whole drama thing. And one of the reasons I did drama at that time was that Christians were doing drama and boring everyone to death with it. Christian drama in the 1980s, 90s was terrible. It was just terrible. It was badly acted, it was badly done. It wasn't funny, it wasn't incisive. So we wrote things and did things which were on the edge. So my big influence, of course, in writing all the sketches I did was Monty Python's Flying Circus. That was my big influence, and I still watch Monty Python now. I've seen the series time and time again, and what I've discovered is when I watch the series, I think they've copied me. I actually think they've copied me, because so many of my sketches are like Python. I think they must have got that from me. But of course, it's part of me, you know, the dead church sketch based on the dead parrot sketch, which is a very thing, and then the other one about a man coming in to hospital, you know, and he's bleeding all over the floor, and someone's asking him, and your name, please. But I discovered that was a Monty Python sketch, which I didn't know. I'd seen it there. So, you know, creativity is key. If you're not creative, well, you know, and you're all creative in different ways. I'm not creative singing and things like that. I'm not that. But, you know, everyone's got something to be creative about, and you've got to work on it. It's not automatic.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Kev. Thanks so much for sharing that. And we know that, you know, Welsh revival history is a massive part of your heart. And so I'm just going to pass this on to Han now and get her to ask some of the questions that's on her heart. So take it away, Han.
Okay. Yeah. Carry on.
I wondered if we could start with the question of what role do you think song played in the Welsh revival?
Oh, it was huge. Of all the things really that characterised the Welsh revival of 1904 was song. That was everywhere. People couldn't help but sing. They had been touched deeply, and their response was to sing in the language and in the hymnology that they already knew. So if you were in Wales at the end of the 19th century, you were brought up with hymns, piles of them. Lots of these hymns have been written all through the 19th century. You sang them on a regular basis. You had a Gymanfa Ganu, a singing festival that you went to. There was a big organ in your church, and all these different things. You were brought up to sing. The Welsh people sang, okay? But when the revival came, what happened was these songs became real. The theology of the songs came alive. They came alive because people's hearts now understood them. They understood what they were singing. They've been singing these things for years. But it just came alive. And, you know, the famous one is Here is Love Vast as the Ocean. Wasn't the only one by any means. So that they recognized Here is Love Vast as the Ocean, loving kindness like the flood. You have the whole idea of the flood of God's love coming down. That's exactly what they felt. So they sang what they felt. So what happened was, instead of having hymn books disappeared. They went. During most of the revival meetings, especially with Evan Roberts himself, they just pitched songs. So for the first time, or one of the first times, you've got a charismatic service. I use the word charismatic with a small c. So people would just pitch songs and everybody would join in. They all knew them. They all knew the songs. So someone would begin singing from the back and everybody would join in. Choruses were thrown in. And it became a revival of song. Actually, it was even criticized for being so full of song. On top of that, you had Evan Roberts' team, who were women, and they had wonderful voices. And that team got together very, very early, and they sang in the churches and led the singing. Annie Davis, the most well-known, she would get up and she would lead in singing, and she would feel the Holy Spirit coming upon her, and she'd begin to sing a song and everyone would join in. It was huge. It was a major characteristic of the Welsh revival of 1904.
I remember reading as well an article, and it was from a newspaper cutting that Evan Roberts had done with a journalist from London. And I think the journalist asked him a question like, you know, do you think revival will reach the shores of England and Scotland and Ireland?
Mhm.
And he comes back with the answer, well, the question to ask is, can they sing? And
This is right. What a great, that's a great, I didn't know that.
I
Never
just
come across
found
that.
that profound, and I think
Yeah,
that's something
yeah,
that's been in my heart is the beginning of Sound of
yeah,
Wales, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
There's a song in Wales that holds such a deep seed of
Yes.
the richness of truth. It's not theology, it's experiential
I,
encounter with the living God.
and that is the thing with the Welsh hymns. And every morning, nearly every morning, I've got the book right there. I have an 1847 hymnal. Samuel Roberts' hymnal, first published in 1842, but I got an 1847 edition of it. So I generally use those hymns, those old Welsh hymns, as devotions. I love reading my prayers because some of these people, and you're dead right in saying they're not just theological and they're not just experiential. They're experience and theology linked together.
That's good,
And
Kev.
the great thing about non-conformity in Wales is that there's a link between serious theology, especially 18th, 19th century, and serious experience. One, you can't take them apart. Once you made a cake, everything is a cake, all right? And here, the theology and experience all become one. Whereas often you can sing a theological hymn and it's all theology and there's no feel in it. But in Wales, because of the Calvinistic Methodists, many of them, which means Calvinism was strong on the doctrine, all these different things, but they were Methodists, a Methodist sang. So you have this serious understanding of biblical theology mixed up with mixed up with song and really thrown out as song in revival, not just in revival, but at any time. So you get those two things.
No, that's really good. Thanks, Kev.
In what ways can you see the creative nature of God at work as you reflect on the events of the Welsh revival?
It's a really, again, an interesting question, because when we think of creativity, especially in the 21st century, we immediately go to, you might think of drama, you might think of books, you might think of poetry and doing things in a different way, all those different ways, which I'm very much into, and I think that's wonderful. But in the Welsh revival, if you look at it that way, there's not much happening. I can imagine some people answering that question saying, well, there wasn't much creativity at all in the Welsh revival of 1904, because you didn't get many new hymns coming out of 1904. They didn't need any new hymns. There were plenty of them. They were just enjoying the hymns that had been created before. Was there much poetry? Not much. Evan Roberts wrote a little bit of poetry. Wasn't that good anyway. Did you get drama? No, you didn't get any drama. Did you get painting? No, there weren't many Welsh artists, and really it was too worldly. If you're a fundamentalist type, you weren't going to get involved in that. Writing, did much writing, a bit of history, whatever. So, you think, wait a minute, there's not much creativity here. Creativity in the Welsh revival in 1904 is seen in the actual service. The most creative thing was how the service itself was run. Before 1904, every service in Wales, when it came to a non-conformist service, was exactly the same. Generally, it had 4 hymns with a reading and a pastoral prayer. It was the pastor in the pulpit, the big guy in the pulpit, who was doing all these things, and everyone would join in. It was totally changed. So creativity came upon the actual person in the pew. They were the people who were praying. They were the people who were singing. Take the women with Evan Roberts. The reality is they were creating things all the time. They were creating an atmosphere by being open to the Spirit. They were reacting. This was brand new, brand new. That's why so many people came. One of the things was they'd never seen anything like this before. So it's incredibly creative, but it's a creativity that comes from the inspiration of the Spirit at the time. It's not your typical creativity that we think of today, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you mention any sort of specific ways that creativity was nurtured?
It was, I don't think it was. I don't think it was. It just happened. It was
Okay.
nurtured. It was nurtured by Evan Roberts himself. Let's say that. I think that's fair to say. So Evan Roberts would say at the beginning of the service, sometimes he would go into the pulpit, sit down in the pulpit, say nothing. He would say nothing. He just sit in the pulpit. And so what he was saying, be open to the Spirit. If the Spirit, one of the things he said very early on in the revival, in the first week of the revival in Lacha, he said, you know, if the Holy Spirit comes upon you and tells you to say something, do it immediately. Instant obedience. So people were nurtured by his example. All right. And it's the example of Evan Roberts that's big. I wrote an academic article with my wife, the only time my wife and I have ever written an article together or a chapter together in a book. And we wrote on the influence of Evan Roberts on the charismatic movement and the Pentecostal movement of the 21st century. And it's huge. It's huge. For instance, if you've ever heard of Azusa Street, 1906, the beginning of the Pentecostal movement in Los Angeles, really, their hero was Evan Roberts. So what they were doing, now they'd never met Evan Roberts, but they'd read about him. So they read about this person and they wanted to do something like Evan Roberts was doing it. Now that had already happened in Wales. So there were many people in Wales who were imitating Evan Roberts, being open. So it was the example of Evan Roberts rather than the teaching, detailed teaching and nurturing. There was no such thing as this is how you do evangelism, or this is the ABC of how to sing and lead a service. There was none of that, none at all. It just happened. But the reality is, you know, they've been having Sunday schools. And lots of people say this, oh, well, the word wasn't central. The word had been central for decades. This was the lighting of that bonfire. You know, November the 5th, I always remember the November the 5th in Britain, where you light the bonfire, you prepare the bonfire for the week to come. And then on November the 5th, you'd set it alight. Well, the bonfire had been built, all right, for years and years and years. What 1904 did was not add more to the bonfire, just lit it with gasoline. What, bang, up it goes. Yeah,
That's
it's there.
so great.
Yeah,
I love that. And I love as well, I don't know, Han, whether you think the same here, like the spontaneity, like creativity is spontaneity. And I think sometimes we box it so much within certain categories.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the legacy of the revival, I hadn't even thought of that, is that it's letting the Spirit lead and it's not underestimating the power of spontaneity in our creativity.
And spontaneity comes, you see, in the whole... Spontaneity is not always there with you. All right, let me give an example of creativity. So, as I said, 4 years ago, I started writing poetry. I've never written a poem in all my life, never. So I was 61 when I wrote my first poem. And I got up one morning and I had this idea. And so I wrote a poem. And I thought it was pretty good. Actually, it was pretty good. I was really impressed. I took notes on myself. It was very good. But you know, for the next 3 years, I began to write poetry. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, go down, write poetry. Write. I couldn't stop writing. Now I can't write a thing. Nothing. Gone. If I sat down all day today and tried to write a poem, I couldn't write it. And I look at some of the poems, the best poems I wrote, and I think, who wrote that? Who wrote that? Wow, that's pretty good. Couldn't do it now. And sometimes, you know, in this spontaneity, you've got to work with the moment. Work with the moment, and you can't just turn it on and turn it off. You can't. That's the danger, I think, of imitating. And I was speaking at the leadership forum in Wales. Was it last week or the week before? Doing a sort of lecture on this, and telling people the problem with looking at revival is this. People want to time travel, to use H.G. Wells's famous time machine book. People want to time travel back to 1904 and want another 1904. You can't do that. 1904 is its own context. It's totally different. You can't go back to the early church. Lots of people come to me, they say, oh, the early church, oh, that's what we need. Go back to the early church. I say, which one? Do you want to go back to Corinth? Do you want to go back to Galatia? I don't want to go back there because they made a mess of it. All right, there's an evolution and growth. So what we've got to find out is what God is doing right now and respond to that. We can be inspired by the past, absolutely. That's why I read. That's why I read church history. I love church history. I'm inspired by it. I'm inspired by the great heroes and heroines of the faith. But you can't copy them. You mustn't copy them. And when people copy them, it becomes hollow and clangy and echoey and empty. And I don't want that sort of thing. I want it to be genuine and real. And when it's genuine and real, people know the difference. They know the difference. They really do. You know, so that's what my heart is there. And with revival, I always say this. I said it in the conference. Please have a wide definition of revival. Have a wide definition. Again, I note the silent revival in the 1970s in Wales. You know, where God worked in Aberystwyth University, Bangor University. He worked amongst the brethren, for instance, many Pentecostals. And so many people became Christians. Nobody called it revival. Nobody. Good. But God was at work. What was he doing? He was reviving. He was touching people. And I think we really need, we need not to try to get back to these historical instances which aren't going to repeat themselves. They aren't, because we've moved on. Not that we're better, but we moved on. It's different. You can't have 1904 anymore. You can't have 1859. You can't have 1762. You can't have all these revivals in that way anymore. They're gone. Leave them and be open to what God is doing right now.
Amen.
Yeah. So good. In what ways do you think the revival shaped the creative expression of the Welsh people?
I think that's a bigger question than 1904, okay? So what I would argue is this. The creative expression of the Welsh people really is linked with Christianity and the growth of Christianity in Wales. So if you go back to the 19th century, for instance, so 19th century Wales, I love the end of the 19th century in Wales. Everyone's got their favourite period. At the moment, that's my favourite period. It used to be the 18th century, and then the early 19th, and I go back and forth. Anyway, the reality was that Wales was a sort of Christian nation. I'm very careful when I say Christian nation, but it was. Everything was influenced by Christianity. Everybody, not everybody, a huge percentage of people went to Sunday school, non-conformist Sunday school, Baptist, Methodist, etc., etc. They were brought up like that. What did they do in Sunday school? Well, they read. What you've got in Wales is a group of people by the end of the 19th century. They had been brought up to go to Sunday school, to discuss theology, to sing, to write poetry, and they were writing poetry, big time. There were many great poets. There were Eisteddfodau, where people would do the poetry, etc., etc. Most of it was Christian, and the nation itself was creative because of the influence of Christianity, and that's where you get the work. I love the idea, you see, of the working class Christian. And the working class Christian, let me give you a caricature of the working class Christian. Say a miner working in the valleys, all right? Well, he would go to chapel on Sunday. He would be literate. He would read classical literature, discuss classical literature. He would know his Bible back to front. He would be involved in singing. Very often at the end of the 19th century, he was getting involved in the union movement for social justice. They would go, it's worth going to St. Fagan. And if you go to St. Fagan, go to the Working Men's Hall. You know the Working Men's Hall in St. Fagan. Look at the books. because the books are original. Look at the books and you think, what? Working men reading these? Yes, absolutely. It was a literate society in Wales, and we've lost a lot of that. We've lost, the working class has become less literate because there's less chapel. And I really do believe that many, I mean, you take Dylan Thomas, Dylan Thomas. Dylan Thomas it wouldn't call himself a Christian in that sense, but lots of what he says comes out of a Welsh, a Welsh religiosity, which is incredibly creative. When you read Dylan Thomas, man, you know, Bible black, you know, when he talks in his, I can't remember the name of the play, you know, this play. I can't remember the name of it. How can I forget that? That doesn't matter. Under Milkwood. You know, talking about Bible black and the Reverend Craddock Evans or whatever. And you know, it encapsulates something. The Welsh, there's Christianity everywhere in Wales. And it's still there, but not as much. It's still there, but not that much. It's part of it in the soul of Wales. But maybe what's needed is that again, and I go back to an earlier illustration, that needs to be lit again with an imaginative, present work of the Spirit that could set that alight in whatever that might mean in the 21st century.
It's really good.
In sort of coming to the end of our conversation, I wondered whether you could share some thoughts on the legacy of the Welsh revival. How has the legacy lived on?
Oh, it's big. It's big. It's good and bad. I'll start with the bad because I want to end on the good. Okay. And the bad is, I've already mentioned it, but I want to underline it, is that the Welsh revival becomes something that everyone wants to go back to. I've already said that. So that's a bad legacy. If you create something that's impossible to happen again in exactly the same way. So people are always trying to travel back in their time machines, and they're not making it. They're not making it. So you live a whole life waiting for God, and God who never comes, in the words of Samuel Beckett. So you're waiting for the 1904 revival, and the 1904 revival never comes. So you spend your whole life at the side of the road, like Esteban or whatever his name was, waiting for something to happen that's not going to happen. That's bad. That's not good at all. That's really bad. So that is one legacy that the Welsh people need to be very careful of. Because you hear people say something like this, oh, it'll all be right when the revival comes again. God can, oh, please stop it. Stop it. Pray for revival, yes, pray. But pray to get involved right now. Do whatever you can right now. The positive thing, which is much bigger than that, is a number of things. For instance, it was a huge influence, as I've argued earlier on the growth of Pentecostalism. The way we worship today, all right, you can trace that back, if you like, to Evan Roberts, worship leading. Evan Roberts up front, open to the Spirit, what's going to happen, especially in Pentecostal circles and charismatic circles. Evan Roberts lives on there. You see that influence. So it's a huge influence. Pentecostal movement, the fastest growing Christian movement at the moment in the world. All right, you can trace it. They wouldn't know who Evan Roberts was. Please don't. Actually, a number of them would. But most people wouldn't. But that's just norm. It's become norm. What he was doing was just norm. Has become norm now in certain circles. So that's one of the big legacies. The other legacy, and another legacy, is the beginning of new denominations. So you have the beginning of the Apostolic Church, for instance, in Wales, which spread in a huge way throughout the world. And I think, is it Nigeria? It spread in a big way in Nigeria. I can't remember offhand. So that is still going on. The things that started in 1904 continued on. Then you've got missions. So many people went on missions. One of the things I have in the seminary here at Gordon Conwell is a number of students who are Korean. And of course, the Welsh revival touched Korea in 1907. That was the time, and just a few, maybe 2 years after that. So they all look back, and they all look back to the Welsh revival. Lots of these Koreans know all about the Welsh revival, etc., because it touched them and spread throughout the world in that sense. But one of the great legacies is the legacy of changed lives. And lots of people say, well, you know, what happened to the revival? Just fizzle out. Well, it stopped being, revivals are not meant to be something that go on endlessly. It's like having an endless honeymoon. I don't want an endless honeymoon, okay? I'm happy to get down to life, all right? And that's wonderful. But the honeymoon's a real hell. And I remember in the 1970s, I was doing research for my research, and I interviewed a number of people who remember Evan Roberts, who knew him. And I always remember one old lady, and she gave me a postcard of Evan Roberts, bless her heart. I've got it up in my office in work. And I asked her the question. I said, you know, lots of people say the revival ended, and you know, in 1906, Evan Roberts went into to live up in Leicester. So what do you say about that? Oh, she said, she was wonderful. And she had that sort of Anglo-Welsh accent like that, you know. She said, I tell you this, the revival that started in my heart all those years ago is still burning today. The revival has never gone out. It's burning in my heart today, never gone out. That's a legacy. That was the 1970s.
That is
the 1970s.
Wow.
Yeah. Never forget it. Never forget. And she would hold prayer meetings in her house, praying for missions right up to the end. Never stopped. And many of the people that I know or knew were influenced big time by people who were in the revival. And what I love about that sort of spirituality, I think one of the great legacies of the Welsh revival was a new Welsh spirituality. Yeah. Many of the people who were saved went into the Brethren movement, for instance, Plymouth Brethren. A number went into the Apostolic, a number went into all different things. But I think of the ones who went to the Brethren movement, which wasn't Pentecostal at all. But they went to the Brethren because the Brethren movement was something similar to what happened in the revival. Everyone got up when they got up, etc., etc. And in Armandford, a number of the people that I knew and you knew, Kath, was second generation coming from the revival. So Meyer Higgs, her father was saved the first week of the revival.
Wow.
Okay? First week of the revival in Armandford. And he came out from the chapel and went and joined the Brethren. Now, these people had a deep, warm, felt Christianity, which was a sanctified Christianity. Wow. They understood holiness. And I'm going to use the word godly. These were godly people. And let me tell you, here is a word that isn't used today in describing someone. They might say he's a great preacher, or she's a great singer, she's this, he's that, whatever. Godliness. Godliness. The word I would use coming out of the Welsh revival, on many of the converts, they were godly. Wow. You smelt God on them. It was like Moses coming down from the mountain. You know, his face was shining. And many of these people, second generation, even third generation, still shining because of what God had done in their lives. They were holy people. There are plenty of faults. They could be very narrow on things they didn't need to be narrow about. Okay, and they caused some problems maybe for many people with that. But I tell you this: the many of them that I met, second generation mainly, I met, they were godly people, and I look back to them, and I moved to the depths of my soul as I think of their example. They're my example of true Christianity. They are. So maybe I'm in danger of looking back a bit too much as well. but they inspire me today and remind me of Christianity in the flesh, an incarnation in human fallible flesh. And I met those people and I'm thankful.
That's so amazing. And you know what I love, I've been looking a little bit more into the Welsh revival, and repentance was such a huge part of it.
Huge.
Yeah.
Massive.
You know,
Massive.
I think that's something we've lost
Totally.
in today's kind of millennial, you know, Gen Zers and people my age. We've just lost the beauty of what it means to be repentant. And like you said, Kev, that whole theme of holiness is very rarely touched on. And we need to get back to that. We need to get back to understanding what it is to fear God, you know, in a way that is really healthy. And sanctification it's so key. Well, thank you so much, Kev.
Thank you.
You have
Pleasure.
so
Fun.
much light, and well, I love you to bits, and yeah, thank you very much. One last thing, if you had to give a one sentence piece of advice to faith-filled, Bible-believing creatives, what would it be?
So that's a very good question. What would I say?
Put you on the spot now.
Yeah, no, it's good. No, it's good. I think it's got to come from you. It's got to be genuine. It's got to be you. Don't try to be anyone else. Be you, because God created you. Don't try and be anyone else. Be yourself before God and use those talents, your personality, your gifting, honed, obviously. It's not automatic. Honed, but be yourself. When people see genuine, that's what moves them. Genuine.
Amen.
Yeah.